Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
We have our special guest with us today, Miss Jamie Lynn Crofts, our Wonkette lawsplainer. Can you tell the folks a bit about yourself, Jamie, and what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, hello. If y'all are regular readers and have been for more than a few months, you may know me. I was a civil rights lawyer in a former life, and now I'm the policy director for Wisconsin Voices. We're a progressive nonprofit and trying to do things about racial justice and equity and civil rights here in Wisconsin. And I'm excited to be here today because we have a lot to talk about, including our next Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, who I am happy to have rightly predicted. It was so much more fun than when I got Amy Coathanger right for Trump.
I remember you getting Amy Coathanger right. I distinctively remember that you were like, "This is who it's going to be," and I was like, "Oh no!" And then it was her.
Yeah. So this is kind of the opposite of that, which is nice.
Yeah.
And we've got some law and order fun to talk about today as well.
Yes.
Well, obviously, and I'm not going to try to be my normal depressive self about worrying about Manchin blowing up this whole thing because he's been cagey in some of his statements, and Jamie had actually spoken when he torpedoed Tandon's nomination for. Not all of us are fans of hers, but it was for BS reasons that he did this, like mean tweets. So he's never. I've been told from folks that they will say, "Oh, he and Sinema are always reliable on judges," but they've reached a point where I don't know how much I fully trust them. So I'm very wary, but I'm hoping that they will kind of come.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I lived in West Virginia for most of the last decade. And so I have experienced an unfortunate amount of Joe Manchin. And yeah, I'd like to think that he'd be a reliable yes. He voted to confirm Judge Jackson for the DC circuit. He was not around for her DC district appointment. But I mean, she also got some Republican votes.
Mm-hmm.
So, theoretically, and that was last year, literally last year.
Yeah.
You can't have gotten dramatically more radical in the past year. And it's not necessarily, though. I'd be interested in your opinion on this because I think it's important. It is not necessarily a balance of power shifting confirmation, but there is a tremendous impact, obviously beyond the superficial, in her compared to Breyer. Or what are some ways that you could break that out to us as to what she would bring to the court beyond essentially keeping the vote the same?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously she's going to be our first Black woman Supreme Court justice, and this is going to be, we'll talk about Clarence Thomas a little bit more later, but this is going to be the first time we've had two Black Supreme Court justices at the same time. So
I will not make a joke I would have made. I used to joke that I would love to get a Black Supreme Court justice. After Marshall left for a while, I'd always say, great to get a Black Supreme Court justice. Obviously, I don't want to police Blackness. He is Black, objectively Black, but in every way, as far as representation being a sense of, when you talk about civil rights or equal rights or what, he has not represented.
Yeah, like giving Clarence Thomas Thurgood Marshall's seat was actually a lot like giving Amy Coathanger RBG's seat.
Yes. Well, in a very conservative view of what representation is, right? It's sort of how they the nose at it, which is because in both instances, it was to me a reflection of how little they think of, because they were doing what they often emphasize with affirmative action pick. Because I believe John Roberts was in contention in 91, and there is no realm of reality where Thomas was more qualified on any level than John Roberts, even in 91, it was clearly he was chosen because of his race. And I think that's, I'm sure, something that dogs him to this day as to why he was chosen, why if there are other Black constituencies out there have not been chosen by Bush or Trump, why this was a specific case where he was able to power, he has to live with, and he doesn't enjoy that, I'm sure. And to the extent that that causes him pain and torment, that's wonderful. But and then, Coney Barrett, who I think is like a year and a half older than I am, and I think has a it's possible to be a competent lawyer and in your late 40s when she was, but I mean, she really was not. There were tons of conservatives who were just as easy to be a reliable conservative vote. It didn't need to be. It was kind of like, gonna stick it to the ladies. And I think it was Trump in his Trumpian way who said, I'm saving her for RBG. He said that after Kavanaugh.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And so, now she is going to be, probably the deciding books. I think that overturning Roe is going to be a bridge slightly too far for John Roberts. So it's going to be her who's the deciding to overturn Roe this summer. Mm-hmm. But to get back to our exciting news.
About her as to what's different with her and Breyer.
Yeah. So Judge Jackson, she was just appointed to the DC circuit last year, but she was on the DC district court for I think 8 years, because I believe she's about 9 years into her judicial service right now, which is more than several of our other justices had combined before they were appointed to the court. Although that we're going to have Republicans being like, she's only been on the appellate court for a year. But she's just also, a badass. I assume we can swear, right?
I swear all the time.
Okay. She's also just a badass. I mean, she went through Florida public schools, again, like Lindsey Graham was bitching, Harvard and Yale, because she does have those traditional Harvard, Yale qualifications that most of our Supreme Court justices do. But she got there herself, not through some fancy Georgetown prep school.
Well, her dad did not buy her,
Yeah, she wasn't a legacy.
Yeah. She worked her ass off. She worked 5 times as harder as all those old white guys did to get to where she is. And she also, she could have only done the big money thing after she graduated law school. And she did she did do some big firm stuff, but she also, and this is one of my favorite things about her, spent 2 years as a federal public defender. And we have never had a former public defender on this.
That I love. That is also a very big plus for me.
It's huge. I mean, we have so many former prosecutors, and we've had so many former prosecutors, and we've never had someone who thinks about criminal justice from the standpoint of the rights of the defendants.
Yes, I mean, that's important. Some, conservatives now claim that that's important when related to January 6th, when it affects them. But obviously, I think it was Ted Cruz is typically idiotic way was accused, like the lady of like, why all this work at the Innocence Project trying to release people. It's like, well, you understand that guilty people, if innocent people are in prison for crimes they didn't commit, the one-armed man is still out there. You want to actually,
it's because I actually feel like that sort of like breaks down the fallacy of President of the United States to begin with. Like, no, they don't really care who's in prison as long as there are people there and they can go like, see, someone's getting punished, and that's all that matters.
And it's not to get too far afield of this, but it's not this idea that cops want to get an arrest. That's ultimately their job. They want to get an arrest. Prosecutors want to get a conviction. There's been tons of cases of sort of like, so the efforts to try to make that harder to get arrests, harder to get convictions, that you have to actually work at it, is not so much so that you can get, it's often presented in media as helping obviously guilty people get away, like that you're letting the Joker off into the streets of Gotham or whatever because of some kind of loophole or whatever, or you stuttered while saying the Miranda rights and now the rapist is free. It's like not that. It's like you're ensuring that you're actually getting someone who is guilty.
Yeah.
If you don't, the actual person who committed the crime is still out there. And there's been tons of cases where even the guy has been like, they've admitted later, they found the guy who's committed a crime while someone's been in prison. So yes, this is important work. It is important that we have someone who, as you said, a public defender on, and probably not as much an institutionalist as Breyer. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think so. And another thing that she spent some years doing was she was on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, which, works to reduce the disparities in prison sentences. So I think that, beyond just like her background as, a Black woman in the United States, like she in her career experienced these things that make you think differently. And as much as anyone is going to run around and say, judges need to be objective. No, every judge brings their personal.
No one is objective.
Exactly. There is no such thing as being purely objective. Every person in the world brings their own history with them, and their history shapes the way they look at things. Like, that's just a fact.
Objectivity has often been a sort of a white conservative sense of this is how the world is, and so I'm objective viewing the world this way without any sort of awareness, and so it allows it to be that there's no need for a Black woman in this committee because she obviously can't bring any sort of information or data that I don't have. A white man and lives in
because the white male the white male viewpoint is coded as objective. Like that is how we define objectiveness in our culture, and that's not exactly true.
Right. It's like how you hear, all of the, old white conservatives screeching about judicial activism when it's something that's good for like women or LGBTQ people or people of color. But, the Supreme Court is overturning Roe this summer, and you're not going to hear that from a single one of them this time around.
Well, that's viewed as what's appropriate and and it's interesting because that sense of what's objective, we saw that with the Minnesota, the cop who killed Dante Wright. The judge, gave her essentially a slap on the wrist, kind of weeping in front of the victim's family about how sad it is. It's like, it's sad for every, these killers, every killer has a family, every killer's going to go away for a while, but her ability to empathize with this cop or this crying white lady, it was Eli Mistel who had said, all of that the judge said makes sense and is true, but that's why it's 6 years. Like 6 years is for you made a mistake. It's not 2 years, it's within the 6-year realm. And the reason I often dwell on that is not because I want to be cruel to cops or cruel to white people or want to have draconian policies, but it's like, okay, well, we don't live in a world where it's like, oh, that's okay, she got 2 years, and every other Black kid or person who's not a cop is getting the same thing. They most likely aren't. And so this is a judge who is basically most likely not charging people equitably or sentencing people equitably. And so that's important work that the justice has been doing, and she's trying to make sure that, or future justice has been doing, she's trying to make sure that is consistent, because if you don't, anything else about her to share? Because that's been interesting so far. I have a lot of great about her.
I'm really excited. I think that she's going to be a great justice, and I think she's a good nominee too, because she did sail through her first 2 confirmations, including one with this exact same Senate last year. And like Lindsey Graham was bitching, saying, that Biden chose the one that the far left wants and blah, blah, blah. He voted to confirm her to the DC circuit last summer.
That was sort of the banana in the tailpipe they were pulling, because they were recommending Childs. So just so that anyone perceived as the left of her would be like a far left pick, and McConnell's doing it and everyone's doing it. But the whole thing is that Republicans never moderate their choices. So Barrett is not a moderate choice. Neither was Kavanaugh, neither was Gorsuch. So this idea that Democrats should somehow choose a Garland every time is absurd.
And as you recall, that didn't work out well. Like they weren't like, oh man, we'd like to reward you for this moderate pick that you gave us as a beautiful gift. No, but
yeah, I think Schumer tried that with Gorsuch, or at least Kavanaugh. It's like, okay, well, you stole this seat, but maybe as a consensus, or it'd be nice if you chose Garland. And I think literally McConnell laughed. Like, he was quoted. Yeah. McConnell laughed was the line. It was like a hilarious sliding article. You just see him. I was like, oh, dude, who is this guy? He has the phone up. It's like, and so.
I didn't know he was capable of laughter, so that's interesting.
I think McConnell,
evil Mr. Burns, Dr. Evil laugh.
Yeah.
Yes.
He could get going.
Very happy person in what he does and the evil he does. He's a compelling villain in that regard. Did you read any about the Clarence Thomas, Ginny Thomas piece that was going on, and about her involvement? I found it very compelling and historically interesting. I knew a lot of this, but it brought it into a sort of relief, given Virginia Thomas's background.
Yeah, so I haven't read the original article. I've just read the articles about it, because like the articles about it pissed me off. And so I was like, I don't think I'm gonna go to the original. But yeah, I mean, we have to support our, famous autocratic power.
What I found interesting about her, what it put into relief is what we're seeing now, is this perception. And I think a lot of even liberals have the perception of like activism has only ever been on the left, and Democrats are often afraid of activism. But there is a lot, and unfortunately, I think media, I wasn't crazy about how Phyllis Schlafly was portrayed in the Miss America. You get Cate Blanchett, obviously.
I couldn't finish watching it. I really couldn't. I couldn't finish watching it. I couldn't do it. I loved Uzo Aduba as Shirley Chisholm, but that was about it. Like, I come from a Shirley Chisholm voting family, but
but she's like it. Schlafly herself is quite like. She herself was an intense activist, passionate, and whatever. So this idea of like conservatives being very buttoned up, uptight, whatever. No. They're angry, and the work she had done, and then Ginny Thomas's mother was with her. Interesting, the term. I think Schlafly did not get something in some sort of election, and she had referred to it as rigged. So you're sort of seeing that already, but. In these debates, these very already in the 70s, this backlash towards the women's movement, the civil rights movement, and this sense of anger and rage. And they're talking about at these meetings, a quote of Ginny Thomas's mom, of they were Nixon lovers. They thought Gerald Ford was too weak to deal with, and they wanted Reagan. Reagan was going to be the angry. I mean, Reagan's Trump, and even now. Helped kind of whitewash Reaganism, but Reagan's, like Trump, Reagan was a combination of intense cynicism, taking advantage of Watergate, ironically enough, the cynicism about government, because he kind of ran a like government's useless, government's a bunch of lazy Black people stealing from you and can't be trusted, can't do anything correctly, with a perceived optimism, because Make America Great superficially is also like Morning America, seemingly optimistic. But then the undercurrent being, I'm going to deliver white Christian dominance. I'm going to restore that. And so it was fascinating to read that, of like that activism from the conservatives that Thomas's mom had been part of in the 70s, and how that's what we're seeing now, and to the extent of it is scary the ways that Biden could wind up being the another Jimmy Carter. Because one thing that Ginny Thomas's mother had said, which kind of chilled me, was she was like, when she was a Reagan delegate in 76, she was like, we need a champion like Reagan. Carter, Ford is too weak. And if Carter wins, we're going to be one step towards socialism. I'm like, really? They were saying that about Carter?
Yeah.
That's always been.
Since the dawn of time, since like my parents' era, everything was going to be, oh my God, socialism. Like that's They don't know what socialism is. They just make it up as they go along. Anything they don't like, oh, I broke a nail, that's socialism. Like
yeah.
that is.
Well, and we had 2 members of the United States Senate this week who apparently think Russia's still communist.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, I hate communism.
I mean, I guess you're blaming that on learning all about the multiple gender. Like they believe that there's like, there's so much, how many, they're learning about too many about genders, not about schooling. That's a common conservative thing, but you don't understand the past 30 years of.
Yeah, you're still like working off of like, like, what's going on with East Germany is these days. Don't hear too much about them.
Russia's a kleptocracy. And this is, typical SCR bashing liberals again, but of course it's easy to bash Republicans. So, I see liberals are kind of often white liberals doing the whole kind of, gee, why do Republicans seem to like Putin and Russia more than their own? What's wrong with you people? It is a kleptocracy. Russia's a kleptocracy. Putin, he hates gays. It is all about.
Well, they literally said it. They explained why they like him better. Lauren Witzke, former Delaware GOP Senate candidate, also like a crazy ass white supremacist, was doing a little interview this week, being like, I just really identify more with Putin because of how much he hates gay people, and is like. And they're like very serious about it. They're like, no, he does right by his people by basically, banning gay people from existing. Steve Bannon was on that too. It's like, how many genders do they have in Russia? 2. Like,
and like if Trump had gotten to be Putin, he would have gotten to throw all the Black Lives Matter protesters in jail indefinitely, and that's what they want.
Unless their own protesters, that is fine. And people try to, well, that's not. Gee, that seems weird that they want the crackdown and crack skulls on Black Lives Matter protesters and not on. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ, because
they're hypocrites. They don't.
Yes,
it's this. I think there is this very like deep-seated belief in principled Republicans, because principled Republicans is like a phrase that is beaten like down, like they are principled, like they are going to stand by their principles no matter what, doesn't matter who it is, and that's like factually not true. In fact, like I'm a lot more principled than they are, because I'm saying I actually agree with the crazy ass, what's her face, DC rioter lady. I do think that prisoners should have more access to phones. I think it's bad that they don't. I in fact think they should have cell phones because it would be less expensive. Really. Like,
I mean,
I don't believe, but they changed.
They've been consistently wrong forever, for the last 50 years or so. And I think it's tough for Democrats to seize on that. They want to we need a big, strong Republican Party. And so when Pelosi says that, it's like, well, why? Because, they you can't say that and then criticize the, Nader voters in 2000 and the Stein voters 2016. If it's literally catastrophic, because they'll say that, it's like, it's like, well, Supreme Court justices are going to die periodically. They're going to retire periodically. If you believe it's catastrophic when a Republican nominates a Supreme Court justice, and spoiler alert, it is, then you're essentially saying these people should never win. And, Republicans operate that way. They say the Democrats should never win, but we're trying to sell thing of like, oh, let's be inclusive, and Republicans can help and be supportive as long as we're in control all the time, which makes you sound like a jerk to me. It sounds like you're not being honest. It's like, no, they should, we need these good principled conservatives, but oh my God, they can't be Speaker of the House or President or
why do they keep not being principled? This is crazy. Like,
it's just it's all infuriating, obviously, but it's also like, what? Okay, you weren't talking about the Trumpy cult. You were just talking about normal Republican evil. Like, you're still fucking evil.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you
whether
have
I'm
to.
tacky or not, I'm tacky. Like I'm also a tacky. Clearly, like look at this. I'm an extremely tacky person.
I love that.
And like,
And I do think it's important to
and I
make
still have
some,
like
yeah.
good politics.
And I think it's important to make some distinction between like the tacky, whatever. I was commenting on this when Ted Cruz's ridiculous peppermint patty thing, right? And I said, look, there is a period in the past 30 years where literally it's become where Rush Limbaugh, like what you would think you would hear on Rush Limbaugh, like Rush Limbaugh would make that joke about, say, a woman who worked in the Clinton administration or whatever. And no, maybe at the country club, Republicans would say that, or like, oh yeah, what a bow wow she is, or something like that. But they would not say that publicly because it was understood that that's impolite. You would not make fun of like how a Black person spoke, whereas he would do that about Jesse Jackson or others. But obviously, polite, George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush would not do that publicly. And people can talk about, well, I'd rather be overtly horrible than hide it. But I do think if you're a marginalized group, a marginalized member of a group, and go to school and you're bullied all the time or whatever, a world where cruelty towards you is just given as a normal and is perceived as people being part of free speech. Because again, I grew up in the 80s in the most conservative Bible Belt part of town. There are a lot of things of like, if you were to say that about to call a classmate fat, or to make fun, or say, oh, look at the make fun of, not that anyone liked gay people, it was understood that you were not supposed to do that, or it was considered at least cruel, even if we don't like these people. And I do think that that cruelty it enables a lot of violence and terrible stuff in our world right now. So I do think, yes, it's I don't say hypocritical, but yes, when Adam Kinzinger or Liz Cheney, they still vote against the Equality Act, just like their voting rights on gays and transgender rights is no different than Marjorie Taylor Greene. But Marjorie Taylor Greene is overtly cruel, like when she mocks a colleague's daughter or child. And I do think that does make a difference in how people treat each other.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we've definitely just gotten meaner as a culture. So I lived in France 2009 to 2010, and I was really surprised when I was there about how like open mainstream politicians were about their racism. People would go on TV all the time and say, oh no, like if your family is from Algeria, like you'll never really be French. I was so horrified.
Oh, yeah.
I was thankful that like people at least tried to keep it quiet in the United States generally. I mean, obviously not everyone. I'm from a small white town.
Yeah.
But the politicians, at least would pretend not to, they wouldn't say those things on TV. And now we've gotten to the point where they not only say them, they try to gear up their constituents.
Well, that's how they rally their base. And then it's excused because, they're just rallying their base.
Yep.
I mean, it is.
What does it mean if it says like, and again, a lot of Democrats would say this of just like, oh, well, they're just passing that evil transgender people can't leave the house on Tuesdays bill to gin up the base and distract from the bad economy. And I'm like, but transgender people can't leave. That's a real thing that's happening. And how do you live in a world where it's presented as you are a target or a distraction from real? No, this is our real life. This is a real kitchen table issue. And it's incredibly offensive. I mean, and it misses the fact that that's their total goal. They do want to pass these bills that we've seen. They do want to restore the cruelty they're doing, like we've seen in Texas or whatever. That's the end game. And I think Democrats need to sort of realize that it's not just trying to pick on someone, a bully trying to get attention. It's like, no. I think the bully really enjoys beating people up. It's not just that he gets up from his mom. He's just really...
Generally, I like, if there's one like thing I feel very importantly about, it is that I never want to hear anything about attention ever again in my life. I don't ever want to. I don't care. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear someone just wants attention. I don't want to hear I'm mad that this person is getting attention. I don't care. Like, I don't, I mean, especially the way that it's used to like police women and everything. Like any woman I don't like just wants attention.
Mm-hmm.
No, I find that really offensive. I think, and before you joined us, Robyn, and Jamie and I were talking about this, of like, there's this woman who's running against Marjorie Greene, trying to unseat her in a primary, which they weren't able to do, the GOP establishment weren't able to do in 2020 before she was far more popular, far more powerful, but they're going to give it a try. But they're not running against her from even an Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney perspective of she's a crazy seditionist and hates her, right? Whatever. It's more of like, we need serious people to do it. It is like literally it's literally textbook boilerplate of stuff you've talked about, how they like polite. It's like, well, no, MAGA doesn't want politeness.
Yeah.
And they said it's an open primary. So they said the best chance that someone has to unseat her, Greene, would be for Democrats to vote for a Republican alternative and saying, we know Republicans going to win. Any Republican is better. But look, I don't like Marjorie Greene, but I'm not gonna butt shoes of Nancy Mace over her, like someone who, or at least Stefanik, because that's how this woman's running, which is a sense of more, here's how terrible Biden is, here's how scary Kamala Harris is, but I'm gonna be a better job at supporting Trump's agenda. It's like, okay, I'm not interested in that. And you won't, like, what Republicans want is what Greene is doing. If you believe that I will hold the radical left accountable, it's like, okay, well, Greene, are you going to make liberals more miserable than Marjorie Greene? Because that's what they want to hear. You want to say, like, if Marjorie Greene was a nightmare, I'll be even worse.
Yeah.
Can't run as the polite alternative to her, I think. That's
It's not what they want. Like,
it's not. It's all garbage. So, like, okay, we have all our statewide elections here in Wisconsin in November, which I'm personally terrified about. And like two of the Republicans who are, the mainstream Republicans running for Secretary of State are talking about how, they want to be election officials so they can overturn the democratic results of elections. And like, this is something that we're fine with, apparently. And
they're all these people are running for office for these Secretary of State positions in order to say, like, no matter what we do, a Republican, like, no matter what happens, a Republican's going to win. And that is literally what they are trying to do. It's scary.
Getting rid of democracy to, overthrow.
You just need to vote more. You need to get the vote out, because if more people vote, then they can't steal it, because it'll be so obvious. It's like, no, I don't think that will bother them.
We're not that great at paying attention to things. Like, I don't think we're going to be like, oh, look at that. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. We're not that on top of things.
Did Jamie freeze?
No one is. Like, pardon? Am I freeze? Did you say I'm frozen?
Did freeze on us, or?
Oh, yeah. No, it's. Everyone thinks that, like, there's going to be, like, this thing that shocks people, and they're just gonna, like, it's gonna, just change everything. Like, all of these, this week, like, people were saying, people are finally gonna, hold. Oh, hey, Jamie disappeared.
We'll be back. Confident. Please.
Sorry. No, it's like all these people are gonna change their minds about Republicans, because they're gonna say, look at these people who have been supporting Putin all this time. Things are really going to change now. People are going to see them for what they are. And no, that's obviously not going to happen. Like, it's never going to happen. There's no rock bottom.
Well, it just seems like you don't want to. It's like you're trying not to actually win. You want Republicans to lose. And it seems like that's what's happening for the past few years. It's just sort of like, okay, I can't win over Robyn by my own charm or whatever. But I'm sure these guys she's dating eventually will be so terrible.
Yes.
We'll realize it's like, well, that's dramatically not a particularly very good argument or effectiveness. But you had written about, again, the prison conditions with Jenna Ryan and about the cell phones and so forth. And so can you just tell me a little bit about, you know, was this woman completely unaware of what prison was? She'd never seen the Shawshank Redemption or...
Well, no, the Shawshank Redemption isn't even what prison is like, quite frankly. Like, prison is really, really, really horrible. Like, it's so much worse than like we as people who have not been to prison think or know. I don't think that you can really even understand how bad it is, like, unless you've been there or you like at least like know or love someone who has been there. It's so bad. Jail is so bad. Like, county jail is horrifying. I know people who have like had to drink the water from toilets because they did not get actual water. It's not. Hey, Jamie, we're talking about prison conditions.
Oh, good.
Super. Yeah, it's something that both of us are feeling pretty strongly about. It's like, it's not okay. Nothing about our prison system is okay. So I don't care who I have to side with in order to make that shit go away. It's bad, and like no, she did not know how bad it was. Yeah. No one you don't know how bad it was. I don't know how bad it was.
Well, it is fascinating that we as a culture still believe that prison should be torture, even though, I mean, granted, there's been tons of in media, again, the great media, but like in the 60s TV show The Prisoner, and then even in The Matrix, the idea that if you're not free, even if it's a pleasant prison, that's bad. So even if I'm in spa-like conditions, but I can't,
it's still bad.
It's still, I'm deprived of my liberty. But if you were to present that to Americans, it's like, well, you've watched The Prisoner, you like The Matrix, like, no, it's bad. Like, it's really, even if you got great noodles and you're like, everything seems pleasant, you're not at liberty anymore. That's a bad thing. But the idea, and then we'll immediately go to child molesters, because that's what, but shouldn't that child molester be tortured every moment of the day? Why is just, shouldn't they have a toilet in the room with them? Why should they live in essentially better than I live? And why should they have all these conditions? And it's just like, well, it is a sort of sense of they want it to be, which is essentially extrajudicial, right? Because the idea
we don't actually sentence people to torture. Like, we're not like, we're sentencing you to prison rape.
You're 15 years of prison rape, and that's what they say. Don't drop.
That's what people are being sentenced for. And if it was, it would be like a violation of the Rape Amendment rights. But we act as if like, oh well, no, that is just how things are and should be. And if we complain about it, then we love child molesters. Jamie?
Right. No, I mean, truly, like that's how it is. Like, we act as though like it is a requirement that all prisons are torture chambers where no one is safe and gangs run rampant and there is major violence happening every day. That is not how things have to be. That is not how things are in civilized nations. Yeah. And even like, it's funny. So I did legal work in Malawi when I was in law school. And we were doing death penalty appeals, and I went into a couple of prisons there, and like, we were just in with the general population. It wasn't like being in a US prison. And when I got back, everyone was like, oh my God, didn't you feel unsafe? And I was like, no, not for a second. I felt incredibly safe. They don't have the culture of violence that we do in their prisons. Yeah, it still sucks. Yeah, there are terrible conditions they have to deal with, but that culture of violence isn't there, and it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have this idea that like, well, if you're in prison, you're garbage forever. And like, that absolutely translates to the way that like we allow prisoners to be treated, to, the culture that, thrives there, because it's just like, well, we're throwing you away now, and your entire life has to be miserable. And yes, people don't get better from that.
No,
right. That doesn't help us in any way, except for like personal satisfaction.
And rehabilitation is seen as naive and so forth. And there's,
but we don't keep people in prison forever. They're going to leave.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a business owner in my neighborhood. She opened a coffee shop, and she was a former inmate and had changed her life. And it's again a typical story, because we do lock up a lot of people with challenge, anger issues or whatever, for good reasons. They're teenagers with anger issues, given their, they wind up in prison. and we talk about the school to prison pipeline, and then like, and this is a woman who just needed, and she got that. There are organizations that go and help people who are, you know, and just, they found an option to help people. But that to me is far better than like training someone to become a better criminal, because that's usually often what happens. If we don't want to hire criminals, we don't want to help them in ex-cons or whatever, or we don't want them to live in our neighborhoods. And so we just essentially create.
I mean, even, you know, we talk about how prison is terrible. Parole and probation are also, like, in this country, are also really bad. And basically, a lot of the time, like, even if it's just like a DUI or something, make it impossible for you to have a job and like live your life or do anything. Like, it's not, like, the whole system is bad.
Yep. And then like for like you know, in a lot of states, you can't get a driver's license until you've paid off all of your court fees when you're released. And so if you're poor, sorry, too bad, so sad, screw you. You can either have a job or you can commit a crime again by driving without a license.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And no, and if having someone in your home who has this record and it being susceptible, cops showing up or everything, puts that family, especially in the marginalized communities, at risk. So they're like having to make tough choices about this. So we don't really make it simple. So here's where, you know, transition to our favorite show, Law and Order.
Yes.
Because you know, I'd written a review about this. I was stunned. I mean, it was. I did not enjoy the new episode, the new season, and whatever. But what shocked me was that they really would open with basically the good guys prosecuting a woman who killed a Cosby stand-in. I was like, really? That's what?
Yeah.
And I'm watching, and I'm so aside, and Jamie and I talked about this, and we'll go into more detail about the sense of how I hate the like, why are you talking to the cops? They get the confession, but it's literally, so Bill Cosby and this Cosby stand-in raped women. I'm going to say Cosby can sue me if he wants to. Raped women, often by lying to them, saying that you can trust me. I'm gonna drug you, but you can trust me. I'm here. I'm gonna help your career or do stuff. He would often present himself as a mentor, someone they could trust. He betrayed that trust and violated them. And then someone at Law and Order writer room thought, hey, why don't we now have, for the woman who shoots the Cosby stand-in, we'll have the cop pretend that I'm on your corner. You can trust me.
It's the Reed technique. So. It's the Reed technique, which is rightfully banned in other countries.
But of all, I mean, to me, of all situations to do that, I'm gobsmacked. I was like, but that's, and part of me, narratively, I'm thinking, okay, I guess you're paralleling that. It'll come back later and be like, oh, that's horrible, but it's not. Sort of like, no, it's important that I lie to people and get confessions. It's like, well, no.
Yeah, like that was portrayed as like, well, that's what you got to do. And it was bad that he, you know, dude from Hannibal was like, I can't, whatever his name is, the guy from Hannibal, who's like the prosecutor now, was an activist prosecutor who said, no, I don't want to use this information that was obtained through lying to this rape victim. And, you know, like, and we got freaking Jack McCoy being like, well, actually, it is totally fine for cops to lie to people. And it's if you don't, you know, win this case, then it's your fault for not relying on this like really terrible like interview technique. I would also like to say that I am personally deeply offended by the fact that they had Norm Davis on the episode playing the Cosby character for like 5 minutes. I'm sorry, this man is a Broadway fucking legend.
Wonderful.
And my like personal favorite Javert. And that is a waste of his talent. And I'm personally outraged by that. And also other things. Jamie?
Yes.
I mean, if their aim was to show that no one should ever talk to or trust the police, that's one thing. But unfortunately, that's never their aim. Like, I really like, I have a trouble watching pretty much any like cop shows. I always did, but like it got so much worse after law school, and it like turned into like it's like I'm watching sports. I scream at the TV. I'm like, he asked for a lawyer. You have to stop questioning, or,
Yeah.
But I mean, it is a good example of the fact that no one should ever talk to the police.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I think that, like, if they were trying to show, like, hey, police are actually terrible, they did a good job of that, quite frankly. But I think the goal was to, like, do some propaganda.
Yeah, it should be a given. It shouldn't be I have to affirm my right to not incriminate myself. Even though it was written terribly, I mean, to me, it's like how I was thinking that, again, in a better written episode, the defense attorney would say not guilty by reason of mental defect. Because if you're talking to a cop without a lawyer, when they've already been searching your house, like Whoopi Goldberg would say, girl, you're in danger. Like, if the cops are able to get a warrant for your house, don't have a casual conversation with them. You are in big trouble. And so the fact that she's doing that makes no logical sense. And not to be classes about it, but it's not like it's some kid on, some gang, maybe it's like presented as an educated person who it makes zero sense that she would talk to them after they've been searching her house. And she obviously remembered having committed a class 1 felony. So probably should not, because cops don't want to help you. They never want to help you or anything.
Yeah, right. No, well, also the thing about, like, the technique that they were using where you can lie to the suspect and be like, I'm on your side. Let me present this totally reasonable version of events wherein you were justified in killing this person, and you're not going to get prosecuted, all this stuff. It's called the Reed technique, and it's not just that it's like cruel or bad, it's that it has a very long history of eliciting false confessions.
Yes.
Because, like, basically people are, especially like among young people, because people are, younger people want to, like, appease authority, and B, people think like, okay, I'm totally screwed. The only way I'm going to get out of this is by just saying I'm guilty, and
Right. And cops are very persuasive at using it. There are, if anyone watched Making a Murderer, that's a very good example of, like, you can actually watch this intellectually disabled kid just be convinced that he should confess. And it happens all the time. Like, and it's funny because, like, whenever stuff like this comes up in a court case, all the prosecutors are saying, well, not only is it important, it's an incredibly common law enforcement technique. It happens every day, as if that means, like, we should encourage it.
That clearly has some very serious issues.
And the conditions of the pressures. I mean, I think of the line from Reservoir Dogs, where the guy's like, if you pressure this guy enough, he's going to tell you who started the goddamn Chicago fire. Doesn't make it necessarily so. And that's generally what, and I would ask you this, I think you've written about this, Jamie, with the Cosby case, because one of the things, the big point of the episode, it was about how this had been originally handled, with his testifying, admitting essentially guilt under a deposition. And he's a terrible person. Cosby's a rapist or whatever. But to me, it was always, well, he's still, regrettably, he has a right to not incriminate himself. And he has a right to not, and also, and the episode also did the whole thing of, like, well, we knew this guy was guilty because more and more people came forward. And I think we do have a certain thing of, like, prior bad acts or whatever. It's not, you need to still prove each one as if they're 60. And so
that was not good either. Like, it like,
doesn't matter that it's not.
I mean, there have certainly been cases where a lot of people have come forward and it turned out to not be a real thing. Like, namely during the 1980s with the preschools and everything, where all these kids were like, yep, totally being molested by Satanists in tunnels, and that turned out to not be true.
But Jamie, could you tell us about, with it, if you're comfortable with this case? Because it seemed to me that with like, it wasn't like, oh, here's a sweetheart deal, we're going to give you immunity. It was just, the closest to justice you could get, unfortunately, this is my interpretation, I'm not a lawyer, the closest to justice was the civil case of getting him, because they sort of pulled a classic Jack McCoy technique on Cosby, being, okay, well, we're not going to prosecute you, so you can't affirm your Fifth Amendment rights because you're not in jeopardy. So is your understanding of that?
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's what the original prosecutor says, that, you know, he really did believe that he didn't think that he could get a criminal conviction. And so he created this deal for Cosby so that perhaps at least the women in the civil case could get some recovery. And I was as irate as everyone else on the day that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision came out, because I don't think he should be a free man. But having read the opinion, I don't necessarily think it's wrong, but I do still think that in the grand scheme of things, it kind of shows how unjust the American criminal justice system is. Because, first of all, I think that had it not been a famous, rich, powerful man, the prosecutor absolutely would have thought that they could get a conviction and would have gone forward with the criminal case. And who knows, whether the original prosecutor was right or not. Just kind of the fact that he would think that, automatically shows that the defendant is in a position of power. And, by its very nature, this kind of deal would never be given to a poor person with a public defender, because it was about money.
Yeah.
And so it really,
and I have no money to give this. You're not going to get $1 million from me or something.
But exactly. You can get a $5 million judgment against someone with no money, but you're never going to see a return on that judgment.
Isn't this somewhat reality, unfortunately? Because I'm nobody. We're all nobody. So someone charges us.
Yeah.
There's
not going to be as much scrutiny. We're not going to have like lawyers that are as great.
And the jury's going to, if it's essential, in a lot of those cases, unfortunately, there's not much physical evidence, as he said, she said, and it's often about credibility. So the victim testifying against Joe Nobody versus someone who comes in with America's Dad, and the ability to get a jury who's this old Black guy, and not to know that's Bill Cosby. To try to find a jury that's going to do that. It's just fundamentally, I could see someone saying there's no way with this.
I don't think a question to the jury. Have you now, or have you ever had a pudding pop? Like,
so it's a tough case. I mean, dramatically, I've always been, as a hardcore Law & Order fan, I know it's propaganda, and I'll get into that. But there's a part of me, I think it's viewed that Black people somehow don't want justice. I remember wishing for Jack McCoy when George Zimmerman walked, because I would see Jack McCoy was someone who would he would run circles around this whole BS. He would get justice for Tamir Rice. Like he's gone after cops on the show. He would go like after the Parkland shooting. There's been episodes that have actually aged much better, where he went after gun manufacturers. And episodes where he went after someone who got someone killed on a TV talk show, which certainly before we talk about with Tucker Carlson and that sort of thing, there's a part of you that wants to see your crusading person get. So the idea of presenting the activist, they presented sort of this activist prosecutor in a different way. To me, it's like, if you're a marginalized person, you still want someone to get justice for you, and someone attacking the powerful to go after. An episode I remember very well was when.
Well, it's disappointing to see him say and they're trying to defund the police. I'm like,
which he knows.
Get them out of my damn face.
Which he knows fundamentally
Sir,
is untrue.
I've loved since childhood.
For him to buy that sort of it's fundamentally untrue. It's something that there was here's where they latched onto this, where cops latched on deliberately. So you might not recall this, but shortly before George Floyd was murdered, there was a global pandemic. And so during this global pandemic, there was no money for anything. There was how are we going to cut funds for everything and do everything? And police budgets were if schools were okay, we have no money coming in. We don't know about COVID relief. They're doing budgets. And well, everyone's going to have to, what are you going to do? And cops like, no, our budgets. Or I remember it was one, and it turned out to be the guy in Minnesota, the police union guy there was like, you know, they're trying to cut our budget. They have budgets for trans people or whatever. It's like one person at like 30,000 or something to like, you know, it was just so they didn't want to do anything. And then later they tried to combine those efforts with the defund movement, where literally after defund, there was no major. And beyond that, they're all full of crap because Law and Order is about, you know, major felonies. And that's part of the propaganda, right? I've written about this, how, you know, when you watch Law and Order, they aren't kneeling on some guy over a fake 20. They aren't busting into a house just for a drug deal or something. There's usually much bigger stakes. And someone had commented on my review of like, well, of course not. They're homicide detectives. And it's like, well, you're missing the point. The point is 4%, not 40, 1, 2, 3, 4% of most police budgets in certain select cities, in a study of this, are devoted to violent crime. So rape and whatever happens to the police is like some kid will get killed because 5 cops showed up for jaywalking. And someone is like, well, can we not fund this? Or when this woman in mental distress had a knife to a neighbor and the cops showed up and they can't deal with someone in mental distress, so they killed her. Can we maybe send a social worker? Can we do something? They're suddenly like, oh, they're cutting our rapists and child molester budgets. And it's like, no.
Because it's like that, for the most part, that's like not who they're dealing with. That might be like who the people on Law and Order are dealing with, but you know, I did not care for Burn Notice, I don't know what his name is on there, going like he was like, I can't even push a black person around without someone shoving a phone in my face. And then like I secretly also think it's good that they're holding us accountable. Like I don't even know what that was. I don't know what that was.
It was a terrible, it was such an awful, well, because let's
like this guy's racist, but principled. Like,
well, let's take the step back. Essentially, it's not that these thugs are pulling out guns. They're pulling out phones. So that their deaths won't be swept under the rug. To me, it's like when I talk about the sociopathic nature of law enforcement, it is, I'm talking about people who can't, like, oh, geez, I've been pulling out phones, I feel under attack. It's like, no, they're pulling out phones because they fundamentally do not trust that if they are killed or that there's going to be any, this is a desperate attempt to keep you from killing them. And if you can't recognize that, if you feel like that's such a hassle on you, what are you even in this for? You're supposed to be defending the people. It's like, you don't care about that. It's like, especially when that's been the, with every case, with Chauvin, with everyone, and all this data that shows of where the police version of accounts is like, it's like the TV sitcom episode where the three of us, something happens and we each have the ridiculous account of the one, and my account is like all the women are jumping like, oh, how handsome he is, and whatever. It's all completely flawed and ridiculous, and everyone's like that's what the police put their version of it. Like the Floyd one was like, and so obviously people realize like, oh, if it's not even like either you will not kill me because I have my phone out, or if I get killed, there will actually be some sort of small justice for me because you can't be trusted. You're going to lie. So you should feel bad for yourself if you're that kind of, that's what law enforcement is. But.
Yeah. Anytime there's a violent crime in Chicago, the Chicago Police Department blames like the ACLU and cell phones for it. Yeah. And like you actually get officers like talking to the media who were like, well, I can't do my job anymore because someone might record it on the phone. And it's like, do you realize that you're telling on yourself when you say this shit?
You're like, I need to break the law and be like, and possibly murder people in order to do my job. No, you don't. Like, and if that's how you're doing your job, you should be defunded.
Yeah.
Like,
fire every
you
single
personally
person
should be defunded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I did enjoy when the cops who defunded themselves by refusing to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like, okay, well, I can't do that. I can't do the most minor thing of protecting myself. But
well, cops aren't technically legally obligated to protect anyone.
Scalia probably wrote that in an opinion once.
No, he did. That was Scalia. I can't think of
right along with that. There's no right for innocent people. Innocent people don't have a right to not be in prison.
Yeah, I'm almost positive that the I can't think of the name of this case, but I am almost positive that it was Scalia who wrote the opinion that cops have no obligation to protect someone from harm. It was the woman who had a restraining order against her ex and called the police being like, hey, my ex has stolen our children. And the police were like, we're using our judgment and we're not going to bother taking care of this. And she sued the police after, he showed up at the police station with their 3 daughters dead in his car. Then they killed him. And she tried to sue the police being like, hey, you didn't enforce this restraining order. And they were like, well, the police didn't have to. They did not have to do that.
I think that was from Colorado, maybe. Yeah. It, truly horrific case. It's where she's like, no, I literally told the cops all along that my husband was going to kill our children. I got a restraining order. I did everything I could. And I mean, she's a woman. She was probably just being hysterical.
Exactly. We have to use our police have to be allowed to use their judgment in these situations.
Whether they get involved or whether they bother. I mean, there is, again, as again, a longtime fan of Law and Order. There were defense attorneys, Shambhala Green from the first 3 seasons, later Diane Melnick, played by the great Tova Feltz. And they
love her.
They believed in the cause. They weren't sort of the cliched cop, defense attorneys who just want a paycheck to just get an openly guilty mobster or something. And there were points where I was thinking you'd get someone like that who would come forward with a actual a more plausible self-defense argument, because
battered woman syndrome or something.
Yes. And this person, especially because, and Cosby's done this himself, which is this, it opens with him saying, I'm going to get revenge on all of you who put me in prison. He's a powerful person. And this is hanging over your head. It could be conceivable that the only way that this power, because
you're a person who has trauma.
I'm sorry, you were saying?
That's actual trauma.
Yes.
Speaking of trauma, I have to imagine it has to be pretty traumatic for the women who accused Anthony Anderson of sexual assault, watching him solve this particular crime on television. It was a little bit.
I had forgot. Why did you choose? There are so many different. Why did you choose this particular one? Of all, the Cosby thing, especially all of the law you got so wrong, and who are hero, did Bill Cosby secretly write a spec script of
don't know who's supposed to be the person on the show, which is, I mean, I actually do appreciate a certain amount of there is no good person, because that is factually true and possibly more interesting than here's the hero, here's the villain. But everyone was fucked up except for the girl who shot Javert. But
well, yes, and that, again, that confession being those why is there not an attorney? I think I mentioned to Jamie, shouldn't there be a law that cops can't talk to someone they've executed a search warrant on? I feel that would be an obvious thing to tie up, because clearly this isn't a casual conversation. We have evidence that you might have committed a crime. That's the only right. That's the only reason you can get.
Yeah. No, I mean, frankly, if you are ever being questioned in any capacity, the only thing you should say is, I want a lawyer and I'm not answering any questions. but particularly if your house has already been searched. I mean, come on.
Well, like, I feel like they very much, like, on TV try and push the whole, like, if people ask for a lawyer, that means they are guilty thing, so that people who do go, who find themselves in these situations are like, well, I better tell the cops.
Yep.
And
it's infuriating about this, right? With Kyle Rittenhouse, right? You wrote a lawsplainer because I think a lot of people are like, he's how dare he not incriminate himself on the stand? You're like, well, yes, he's a vigilante, he's an asshole, he's terrible, but yes, no one should, like, there's no game.
Yeah.
Right. Like, no, he's still like, yeah, he's terrible. Yeah, I wish he had been convicted, but like he still has constitutional rights, and actually we should want those rights to exist for all people. And no one has to take the stand. No one has to answer questions for the police, and that's the way it should be. And for, like, I've done a lot of, work with police trying to get certain practices reformed and whatnot. And he was the current police chief of Charleston, West Virginia, who I was working with, who, I said something about how like, I was like, oh yeah, I would say I'm a lawyer, but I would say I want a lawyer and I'm not answering any questions. He was like, I have a 12-year-old son. And he knows that if police ever pick him up, the only thing he's supposed to say is, I'm not answering any questions. I want my dad and I want a lawyer.
Well, and what offends
my parents told me that from like get.
Oh yeah. And what offends me about how the police think they should be able to engage, I have issues with any people who believe they have fundamental rights more so than any other group of people. Right. So, just like I don't like racists, I don't like a lot of how police have a sense of, we have rights that you petty people, civilians shouldn't enjoy, because believe when cops have shot someone, they don't, let me go talk to the chief about what happened and have a nice conversation.
Oh, they've got their representative. They've got their lawyer.
There's people around them. They are very protective of, there's been stories about that, of like right after with Daunte Wright, the people came. So it's already tough to one of the reasons it's very tough to prosecute cops successfully is that they have protection from the jump. So the idea that's like, okay, well, let this kid I picked up off the street, maybe talk to them and like not let them speak to their lawyer or talk to their mom, or pretend that asking for their parent is not the same as asking for a lawyer or something. Like all this sort of stuff is just abhorrent and doesn't actually make anyone safer, because you're just essentially potentially getting the wrong person, or at least in this world where this person was obviously guilty, it just wasn't compelling to me, because like, why am I watching, is this supposed to be a public service announcement to not shoot rapists?
You're a rapist? Yeah.
At least make your propaganda like interesting.
Yes,
let Cosby enjoy the rest of his life, because our system failed at every level.
It didn't feel like a compelling story at all. Like like above and beyond everything else, I was like, this is not that interesting. Please bring me Lenny Briscoe back.
Oh yeah, Briscoe was very funny, very charming. He was flawed, but also, and one thing the shows did, and again, this is part of the propaganda, but it's good television, that they were presented as sort of working stiffs.
Yeah.
Relate to, they're working stiffs, and they kind of like, life. They're not presented as the sort of,
it's like, I've been divorced 87 times.
Exactly. Three priors, no convictions, the classic Lenny Briscoe line, but there's that sense of entitlement that a lot of police have.
Yeah.
Really seen in this episode. So the Cameron,
which is like, that's what makes them dangerous. Like, it's that like sense of power. Like, it's, I call it the, assistant manager issue. Like, you give people like a certain amount of power, they tend to abuse it. Like, it goes to their head. They think it's okay to treat people a certain way because, they're like, I got power, good for me. I can do whatever I want. And the better I am, the more I exercise this power, the better I am at my job.
No, exactly. I mean, and I think, the Cameron Manheim replacement for the beloved Lieutenant Van Buren, who again was a reflection of, she was a cop who had sued the police, NYPD, for discrimination, and they had retaliated against her grossly by cutting her funds and so forth. And like, so you were getting a sense of it was far more progressive, arguably, in the 90s than now. And so the Kim Ryan character, who reminded me, it's like there's an episode of Seinfeld where George Costanza says that the best way to convince people that you're really busy is to just look annoyed all the time. So that felt like her entire performance style. You know, it's like, oh, she's busy. She's a tough cop. It's like just, she's like writing on about these progressive, Jamie Ross is no progressive crusader who just wants to get her name in a paper. It's like, well, Jamie Ross is a former defense attorney. You sort of forgot. And just as a writer, it's very, it's like, well, you know, I like Jamie Ross. I remember Jamie Ross from when the show was really good. So you're going to have your new character be an asshole to her is a weird choice. Like, it's like you're trying to make me not like this character. That's like a weird, like dramatically, it makes no sense. You don't.
I don't like that guy anyway. I don't like him any more than I hated Elton from Clueless, and I personally blamed him for the series ending.
I have to like do what I am.
That was Anthony Anderson's last partner was Elton from Clueless.
Well, that's how I have to figure out who you're talking about.
Please don't that you're missing before you are, you know.
Jeremy Sisto is who she's referring to. Yes.
You will always see Elton from Clueless to me. I don't care how old he is, what he does, he is Elton. But
yes.
Okay. I do not like Burn Notice at all. Like, I just do not care for him I don't understand him as a character, and I don't like him.
That's going to make it tough to connect, especially when he's cruel to women. Like, literally, he comes in. So Jamie Ross, like, he's an asshole to her, and like, what are you dating? I love the scene where he's just sort of like, "Well, did you kill him?" And it's like, well, she's not gonna say yes, and she's gonna kiss you. Is this like what is this police? It's like a bad police show. It's like, well, she grimaced when I accused her of murder, so maybe she's guilty of murder. It's like, well, no one likes me accused of murder.
Actually, this is one thing that I do want to bring up that I think is very important, is the whole like, oh, this person acted guilty. And, you know, the way that we interpret acted guilty is like actually horrifying. It's like, oh, they were too scared, or they were in shock, or they, you know, like had like a normal trauma reaction to something. Like, I have actually laughed at horrifying news before, because that is,
well, no, I mean, it's kind of like being a woman or a person of color, where like no matter what you do, it's going to be interpreted against you. So you know, she's too scared. She's not scared enough. He's too angry. He's not angry enough. Wouldn't you be angrier if you were being wrongfully accused? I mean, like,
like, there's no good way to not look guilty. Like,
and there's a lot of cultural.
It's horrifying the amount that people think that they can spot this.
And isn't there some cultural bias to it? Because I was thinking of, like, I've seen like a stone-faced black woman. I was like, oh, now she's really pissed. Because my own experience was like, that's now she's pissed.
Yeah,
you've gotten her really mad. Back out. But and like someone laughing culturally, if you knew, so there's a lot of cultural bias to how people interpret that data or that information. And again, based on the documentary I recall watching in college, Basic Instinct, sociopaths can easily, you know, bluff their way through lie detectors or any sort of interrogation style. Well,
they didn't want to do a lie detector, so clearly they're guilty. Lie detectors are bad.
So bad. And like, actually, a lot of courts have written opinions about how terrible they are when they did not let that type of evidence come in. Unfortunately, it does come in sometimes, but like, no, they're bad. This is not science. This is made up.
I mean, not to get too off topic, but science in general in the courtroom, not great. No. Not great. Guess what? You can't really tell shaken baby syndrome.
That's another one where who knows even how many people have been wrongfully imprisoned for their child's death. like as if there's something more
you
horrific than your child dying.
It's mostly Black men who are going to prison for shaken baby syndrome, which there's no actual way to prove it happened.
Yep.
Oh yeah, as a jury, it's always this kind of, and I guess to close that out, it's like you and I talked about this. I think when Robyn was out 1 week, was like, it always seems like when it's a white defendant, or it'll be this sense of, wow, it's really hard to prosecute someone. It's like if you're Black, you're like, looks like it's pretty easy. Like it's like, man, how can we get Trump? It's so hard. It's like, well, I mean, really, it's like not. A lot of the arguments for Trump. I mean, it was one guy. I forgot his name, Ian Millhiser, something like that. But he had said, well, I guess we can't do anything because, look, if you were to prosecute someone who 30% of the nation believes the rifle, it would be chaos. It was like, well, what? Like, so he's untouchable. So it's kind of like why go after the mob? Mobsters are like, well, I'm just going to say, if you prosecute me, I'm going to release the hounds or something. It's like, well, obviously we need to kind of hold him accountable or not hold him accountable, dependent upon the fact that he committed crimes, not the fact that he is somehow untouchable. But unfortunately,
U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland seems to be of the
it's well, everyone is this is a very touchy topic. You've probably noticed, I don't know as much if you've written about it recently. I found that I've just quoted people, and I once quoted Claire McCaskill, so not AOC, not Claire McCaskill. What the hell is this guy doing? And people responded immediately like, well, you're the Farouk assault who wants a conviction now, you're a spoiled brat or whatever, you're do something Twitter. Merrick Garland he doesn't have leaks. He's working quietly behind the scenes.
He's gonna do just as good of a job as Robert Mueller did.
It's like or he's not getting involved in this at all.
Like, I don't understand people who think that these people are getting stuff done by stealth. That doesn't fucking happen. It doesn't. I
think there's not. I mean, there's a bunch about
it's so weird to me.
It's not. He's prosecuting these coup conspiracy. The folks as if they were just knocking over a CVS, which is fundamentally a problem because it's someone who does essentially summer camp in prison for trying to overturn an election will probably feel that it's worth doing again because they're true believers. You almost have to kind of, not that I'm talking about locking the key, throwing away the key, but you need to do something to discourage.
It was a coup attempt.
I don't necessarily think that prison and anything actually discourages people from doing things that they actually want to do. I don't think that's a thing.
It's just, I'm so sick of, this kind of just being like, oh, it's, it happened. And it's we have forgotten the fact that this was a coup attempt. We all watched what was happening on January 6th. It was fucking terrifying. Mm-hmm. And then, this is the part where people hate me. Sorry, but I knew immediately when Democrats were like, oh, well, it's going to take 2 weeks to get the House back in session or a week or whatever it was, that we were going to lose that momentum because that's what Democrats always do. They somehow take something that, should help them because the other side is being truly terrible and then kind of sit on it. And now it's just become a thing where it's there are people on the other side openly supporting it, and that's fine. And
who are in office,
no, they fund them. I mean,
Ginny Thomas,
Rush Limbaugh on the on the radio. It's literal people in office who are also hanging out with white supremacists on the side.
Well, I mean, by all data, I think people are more inclined. It's gotten. More Republicans are saying it was justified or whatever. We've done nothing against that sort of. I mean, to your point, Robyn, it's not so much I'm thinking of you can discourage bad behavior as a sort of, though, if it does not help a larger political narrative if you're treating it as if they knocked over. Because from the start.
Yeah, no, I get that.
They're trying to both sides this as being no different than Kenosha. or like someone.
I do think, however, no matter what, they're going to turn into folk heroes for these people. Like, I don't think that there is almost even a way to stop that from happening. And that is probably more concerning than anything. Like,
I mean, I just had very little patience for whenever something like this comes up, everyone's the common sort of response from liberals or the left sometimes is, well, we don't have Fox, or we don't have, it's like just very Eeyore. It's like, well, okay, well, this exists, Tucker Carlson exists, you need to figure out how to confront that. Instead, it's just been like, and as I think Rob and I were saying, that you were had cut off for a moment, was that there's this idea that Republicans will defeat themselves, almost like self-impeachment.
Yeah.
He had said. So they will do something so terrible, it'll be, again, it'll be like the Dead Zone, where Martin Sheen holding the baby up. Trump did that every day. He's holding the baby.
Deep cut, sir.
Everyone's hoping that will happen, and then like, okay, well, and now we can just stop the help or whatever. It's like, well, no, none of that. They will just say, damn right, I held a baby up, and it was that baby was a communist or something. Like they will.
No, there was like a 48-hour period after the pussy tape came out when I really thought it was gonna handle that election.
Yes, you didn't. It was me.
Oh, yes. I agree.
I was like, he just won. I said it.
Yeah, it was. Well, I was surprised. Not to go too far afield on that, but it was like, that's a known issue, right? Like, so it's just
people hate women, including women.
Also, it's a tape that came out that was like, it was like if Madonna was running for president and was like, I was Madonna, but now I'm Madonna. I'm going to be the presidential candidate, and I'm Madonna, and it's like, here's a hot tape of Madonna and Sandra Bernhard talking dirty in 1990. And we're like, yeah, okay, well, that was Madonna. She's acknowledged that she was Madonna. I remember, I was there. She was Madonna. So it's like you got to this point where like Trump's like, well, Trump's an athlete. We all knew that, and he was kind of running as fundamentally as an athlete. It was. I think
I may be an SOB, but I'm your SOB.
Yes, and that, to your point, Robyn, was like the sense of their Democrats and certain polite Republicans going off like, if we expose that he's not Mitt Romney, well, Mitt Romney lost. Maybe he lost because he didn't have a pussy tape.
Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. I think it's because at that point even I had been covering like the manosphere shit for so long. The second that came out, I was like, this man just won the election. And people thought I was crazy as usual, but I was correct. People loved that. They may have, like, to save face, said that they didn't like it. They loved it because they liked the idea that, oh, he's going to put women back in their place.
Yes.
Because there are people who want women put back in their place, and it's not a small amount of them. Like,
it's consistent, and it's just a polite version of Obama telling Hillary, you're likable enough, right? It's just a polite version of putting a woman in her place. So we love it. And so that's just a polite version of, a less polite version, a vulgar version of it. And again, it was consistent with what he was campaigning on or doing. I think with the Comey release, everything with what all of that did, and the email scandal, everything was reinforcing a narrative that Clinton was untrustworthy and people had issues trusting her. And so that was a danger. We could say that's all BS or a lie, but that was never effectively as dismantled. And whatever we've said, that it's just like, oh, woe is me. The media is terrible. What can we do? And it's like, I don't know. You need to figure it out because it's happening again with Kamala Harris. And so if that's your 2024 or 2028 or even 2024 option, don't be surprised if it happens again. I don't like pointing out that something's unfair doesn't change.
That is true. Yeah.
But, right. And meanwhile, like the Trump administration, literally people eating documents.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, like they carry it off. Like no matter what it is, they've got toilet paper on their shoe. They're like, no, this is the look for this season. Like, that's what we're doing now. That's what everyone's doing now. There's no problem with it. Putin's great. We love him. He hates gay people. He is our guy. they carry anything off, and they don't do the with the exception of like, you know, Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney and those types, they never do the like, oh my God, like, oh no, you don't, like, you know, like, we're so embarrassed. This is terrible. We agree this is bad. This is a bad look. Like they don't do that.
Yeah.
And weirdly, if there is one thing that I have unfortunately known throughout my life, it is that if you like, it's a lot easier to just carry something off than to like flip out about it.
Mhm.
Like, you know, like if you have an embarrassing moment, you're better off making a joke about it than you are like going and crying in a corner and like dragging it out and making it into a thing. And that is what the Republicans have been doing, and it works.
Yeah. I mean, like, Trump called Ted Cruz's wife ugly and said his dad killed JFK, and Ted Cruz was like, where do I line up to lick his balls?
Well, I mean, that almost surprised me because Ted Cruz had
established. It did not surprise me.
The reason I say that, it almost did, because he had established himself as, you know, a thorn in McConnell's side and Boehner's side. And I thought, well, knowing that he's a jerk and slimy, he's going to oppose Trump on moral grounds, but that, he'll continue doing that. He'll attack Trump and set up 2024.
Trump took over his spot as crazy, like the craziest. And so like, it was different than with McConnell, where like McConnell was like, oh, he's the establishment. Trump was not the establishment. So Cruz had to then, you know, bend the knee to him.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what everything he does is what he believes is for his own self-interest. Yeah. So that would have made sense. But it was it was a crazy scene. I think I've often said this, of just go ahead and not. And people are very afraid, and I'm hoping I'm going to tie this into the Ukraine, because Ukraine situation, because the president there has his background in the arts, and my friend Maya, like, well, don't present that as being like, wow, we're shocked that this guy who worked in the arts or whatever could be a good leader. It's like, well, yeah, why not? But part of that is like, the problem is not that Trump or Palin or Marjorie Taylor Greene or these people don't have the right type of experience or aren't wonky. It's like that they are sociopaths.
Yeah, they're actually bad people.
Yep. The problem with
terrible things.
The problem with Ronald Reagan was not that he was an actor first.
Yeah, he was very much part of that radical he was that Trumpism. But look, I feel like because of that, Democrats have often recoiled from the idea of accepting that politics is a popularity contest. And so, yes, if you put Gore up against Bush, you're probably going to lose. Bush's problem was, like, in theory, a good version of that. So like a wonkish person who knows he can never get elected, like Cheney, running the show and advancing liberal gains as Bush did, is not bad. But instead, everyone's like, no, it's very important. It's very West Wing thinking. Like, it's very important that we have this great leader who's everything. And the closest I think it's come to that was someone like, so, you know, you wind up with like really like lightning having to strike with someone like either Clinton or Obama, who was perceived as, you know, a celebrity, charming, the great, but also wonkish and qualified and everything. And that's really going to happen. So look, find your popular person, and that person who's not a sociopath, who then can kind of bring in your wonks and bring in your team and advance the goal. That's gonna be the case. Otherwise, you're just gonna get, you know, I feel like people are gonna be like, here's our like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and it's gonna be bad.
I think that a lot of people have just like a very sunny, optimistic view of how people are. Like I am a terrible cynic. I think
called realism these days. Actually,
like, well, no, it's like this whole thing. Like, well, what we should do is keep doing this one thing that doesn't work, because if it does work, that is proof that we live in like the good society that we want to live in.
Yeah.
And we don't live in that society. We're probably not going to get that proof. And if we keep trying to do this, things are just going to get worse. Like,
yes.
like it's going to like exponentially worse.
Yeah. Like I loved West Wing, and like I still rewatch some episodes for nostalgia. I also believe that it poisoned the brains of millions of Americans because guess what? Aaron Sorkin isn't writing reality.
Yeah, I've still never seen it.
I mean, you can't watch it for the first time at this point.
But Jamie, like the end of Law and Order did remind me, it was a frustrating Sorkin moment where it's like, okay, well, this jury is obviously going to acquit. Well, I'm going to give this great closing argument, but it's like in Sorkinville, it's like, okay, well, this candidate's going to pretty much lose it, obviously, but Bartlett's going to give this soaring speech that will change everything. It's like, well, that doesn't happen in politics. It doesn't happen in a courtroom, but people want, it's almost like Robyn and I have this thing we do on Slack, or so she'll describe something that's happening that I think a lot of folks will believe, and I'll like, but that never works. And she'll respond,
but what if it did?
It's like,
because I feel like that's how people sort of think. Like they're like, okay, it doesn't work, but if it did, that would be amazing. Like it would be so cool if we had, you know, like the Hermione Granger president. Like that would be amazing. We want the like wonkish person who isn't like, you know, necessarily dazzling to be president. And I get that, because that would be like, yes, we're not shallow, we're deep, we care about like this, but like, no, we are not a deep people.
Well, I think a classic Sorkin moment to me was where he's running against the obviously George W. Bush character. And the moment that's supposed to be the winning moment, the game on, everyone's excited, is where he comes in and says, that wasn't one big word, that's actually two words or something. And it's like, okay, well, actually no one likes assholes.
No one likes people who correct anyone's grammar. Like it's not like
that's not
like, how do I make people not like me? so that's 101.
That was not a devastating, that's not a devastating moment. No one likes, people like to feel connected to or feel like that. So but that's sort of the key of Sorkinism, the idea of like the belief of like the smartest person will prevail. That's what will prevail. And that's not. And so when
in the West Wing version of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, obviously he doesn't get confirmed at the end.
Well, it's always a good Republican who steps forward, which then creates a situation of good Republican. So the guy from Royal Pains, to use the Robyn version of IMDb of describing people. So the guy from Royal Pains, who's like,
I don't know people's names always.
Republicans are hammering the Bartlett administration for something, and he's part of, but he's only doing it to get to the truth and what's appropriate or whatever. So he comes in and says, you guys are killing the party. You can't ask these mean questions, or if you do, I'll see you in the tall grass. And of course, the bad Republicans like, oh, and of course you're like, I want to date the guy, but he's like, oh, what a nice Republican, he's wonderful. And of course, that wasn't even what Republicans were like in the mid to late 90s.
I mean, to some extent, it was the same thing on Scandal, which I did watch multiple times. Like that, like it was like, oh, I'm a Republican, but I gotta protect a woman's right to choose. No, get right out of my face with that. Like, I'm dating a Black woman and I love abortion, but I'm a Republican. I don't think so, sir.
That's like you're like a moderate Democrat. Like, it's a strawman Republican. It's like the idea of like, that's its own sort of propaganda, right? So the idea of, okay, well, Republicans can't be this bad, so I have to present them in this way. And it's sort of, like Family Ties with Alex B. Keaton was a very nice Republican, but at the core of himself, he wasn't Ben Shapiro. Like that's who Alex Keaton would have been. But at the core of, because obviously he's played by Michael J. Fox, who's obviously charming, but at the core of him is that he's a compassionate person.
Yeah.
He's sometimes full of himself. He's greedy. He's materialistic. We get that. But at his core of himself, he's a decent, compassionate person, which was never conservatism. That's the core problem of conservatism.
The lack of compassion.
Yeah, I mean, there's the remake right now of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and people are talking about how the Carlton character on this is far less likable than obviously the one on Alfonso Ribeiro played. It's like, well, because the Carlton for the 90s, you get ideas like the Black conservative is sort of like, oh, we can make him adorkable. We can sort of make him like Black Fraser Crane. And as someone who's so Black Fraser Crane, I can empathize with like, this is my champagne, you know, like I can empathize with that. But now, like,
you're totally Black Fraser Crane.
I totally see it.
Yeah.
But if you're doing a Carlton, the Black conservative now, unfortunately, that's Candace Owens, who's a terrible person. And so it's a sense of like, well, how do you do that character?
Or Jesse Lee Peterson, like that's
aren't good folks. So, well, we could talk about television all day, obviously. But so what's going on? I know you've been very busy, Jamie, with all this sort of stuff. Are we gonna any lawsplainers in store for us, or anything you're thinking about?
Actually, so I was thinking after this, I'm gonna go back and finish something I told Rebecca I would do at the beginning of January, which is a preview of our upcoming horrendous Supreme Court term, because we're gonna start getting more opinions starting in March. That'll be through the end of June, and we're about to see a lot of terrible things.
Oh, joy! That'll be fun. But I will look forward to reading that as I do all of your stuff.
I really appreciate your legal. I might start. I used to not write as much legal related stuff, but there's a lot to. I know Liz is busy, so I might bug you about some stuff later on if I have questions about something. So
please do. I always have lots of opinions.
And what about you, Robyn? What do you have going on for tomorrow?
Right now, Rebecca has asked me to do a splainer on gender affirmative care. So I am like reading up on that so that I can write that. So
yeah, well, that's my official Republicans are monsters, and I'm not interested in any kind of argument, like trying to find a middle ground or be nice. It's very weird. I'll close this out with this. Bill Maher, because I don't really bother writing about Bill Maher. He annoys me. But he had this whole thing that just struck me where he's
Was
like,
that dramatic enough? Sorry, I can redo that.
I will screenshot that. It's
don't.
And he said, we need to be nicer to Trump voters, or should be more gracious or something. And I'm like, well, you're never great. Like, you just had a whole monologue about how stupid woke people, which is usually code for women or feminists and Black people, how bad they are. You show no sympathy for where they're coming from, that they're just coming in and canceling everything and being stupid and awful. But you really think we need to keep bending over backwards to white, very revealing of a sort of inherent white supremacist misogyny. We need to understand why white men do this. Like, I'm done understanding why you're trying to torture children. And you need to affirmatively go to, we're trying to torture children, make children kill themselves. We don't care. We're monsters. We're going to torture pregnant people. We're going to do it. Like, that's what this party stands for. Yeah. You try to like.
And by the way, I would like to point out I'm a way nicer atheist than he is also. I'm not like condescending to all Christians entirely, but he definitely is. Like, I'm not like, oh man, guess who's a horrible person? You.
Same with Ricky Gervais, the idea that there's no, and that tends, there's a sort of, I would say, somewhat white supremacy in that as well, because it's like your problem often, I would have hated Christian. I mean, I'm not religious, but I would have hated all of it. It was just from my experience with the Bible Belt of white people. But the Black church is very different. They're like, actually, okay, I don't believe in this, but you open your home to people, you go in and help people, and you do. These are all these things that have been great. And if you look at our history of the country, there's Martin Luther King versus what a lot of white evangelicalism has done. So that's that's just twistedness versus whatever. So I look forward to reading that. And yes, this week, let's hope that we come out. Yes,
that would be super nice. I would like that.
No nuclear war. So thank you so much for joining us, Jamie. It was always great.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, we love you. So
now that I'm settled into the new job a bit, hopefully I'll be around a little bit more.
That would be awesome. I always appreciate that and love having you around.
Well, we'll have to do a somewhat semi-regular kind of loss.
Also, when I get back to Chicago, we will totally hang out. It will be amazing.
Yes, I am there all the time.
Yay!
All right. Bye, everyone.
See you all soon.
See ya.